March 2023. Ayr, South Ayrshire. Susan Turner, 1-year-old, inside a dimly lit flat, faced a nightmare no one could imagine. Her tormentors, Michelle Ramage and Ryan Hill, unleashed a storm of jealousy and rage so sadistic it left more than 130 wounds carved into her body, scissors, golf clubs, even her own hair torn from her scalp. Neighbors later spoke of muffled screams, but by the time police forced entry, the air itself was heavy with blood. What could drive a woman to orchestrate violence designed not just to kill, but to humiliate? And why did no one stop it before it was too late? Scottish women who killed. True stories from Glasgow to Aberdeen. Welcome to UK Real Crime, where real crimes meet real justice. Today we journey into Scotland's shadowed past, tracing the footsteps of women who turned from trust to treachery. From the streets of Glasgow to the granite heart of Aberdeen, these cases reveal chilling betrayals and merciless acts, stories etched into Scotland's memory, haunting and unforgettable. First offender, Michelle Ramage, 43 years old. In the quiet streets of Ayr, Scotland, behind the doors of a modest flat, jealousy and rage spiraled into one of the most savage murders the High Court of Glasgow had ever seen. Michelle Ramage, aged 43, stood at the centre of this tragedy. Her life had long been marked by crime. 37 prior convictions, including abduction and serious assault, painted a portrait of a woman hardened by violence. Court records described her as a brutalized woman, herself capable of brutality. She suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder after abusive relationships, but the court would later hear that mental illness could not excuse the horror of what she chose to do in March 2023. The victim was 1-year-old Susan Turner, a mother of 3. Friends described her as kind but vulnerable. Her only mistake was becoming entangled in the jealous rage of another woman. Susan had been texting Jason Bell, Ramage's 1-year-old lover. Messages were frequent, sometimes several times a day, and Susan often visited his flat. These interactions ignited a storm inside Ramage. She was described as raging with jealousy, convinced Susan was a threat to her relationship. Between March 25 and 26, 2023, the simmering anger erupted into violence. Inside Bell's flat, Ramage and her co-accused, 7-year-old Ryan Hill, turned their fury on Susan. What followed was described by prosecutors as torture. Over 130 injuries were inflicted. She was bludgeoned with mugs, a machete, a golf club, and even a radio. She was stabbed with scissors. A dressing gown cord was tied around her neck in a desperate act of strangulation. Her hair was ripped out, her body scored with a blade, her right nipple almost severed. Detectives would later testify that the acts were not only brutal but deliberately designed to degrade and dehumanize her as a woman. Neighbors reported hearing noises, but it was Jason Bell's own brother who became alarmed. He recalled Bell looking like a nervous wreck and warning, "They are going to end up murdering her." His words proved tragically prophetic. On March 26, police forced their way into the dimly lit flat. Officers spoke of an overwhelming smell of blood. Inside, Susan Turner lay motionless on the floor, her body bearing the marks of unimaginable cruelty. The investigation quickly focused on Ramage and Hill. Witness testimony and forensic evidence left little doubt of their involvement. Hill attempted to shift blame, but the scale of injuries and the sustained nature of the attack pointed to a joint enterprise in violence. Ramage initially showed elements of denial, but on the 31st of January 2025, midway through her trial, she pleaded guilty to murder. During sentencing at the High Court in Glasgow on the 13th of March 2025, Lord Mulholland did not mince his words. He described the assault as brutal and cowardly, emphasizing it was akin to torture. The crime, he said, was designed to disfigure and demean Susan Turner. Ramage was handed a mandatory life sentence with a minimum term of 22 years before being considered for parole. The reduction from 24 years acknowledged only the timing of her guilty plea. Her co-accused Hill also faced justice, but it was Ramage whose name became synonymous with cold, jealous violence. In court, observers noted her expression as the sentence was delivered. She stood still, eyes lowered, offering little visible reaction. For some, it was a sign of resignation. For others, a reflection of the hardened criminal she had long been. Outside the courtroom, Detective Inspector Keith Runcie offered condolences. "Our thoughts remain with Susan's family and friends. We hope today's conviction provides them with some solace. Susan Turner's children, aged 9, 14, and 23, were left without a mother. Community reaction in Ayr was marked by shock at the brutality and sympathy for the surviving family. The case drew attention across the United Kingdom, reinforcing discussions about domestic jealousy, coercive relationships, and the devastating impact of unchecked rage. Behind the headlines, the psychological portrait of Ramage revealed deeper concerns. Her defense counsel described her as a victim of past abuse, someone who had endured trauma but channeled her pain into violence against others. It raised uncomfortable questions. How does society manage individuals with histories of both victimhood and offending? Where does accountability end and mitigation begin? The murder of Susan Turner serves as a stark reminder that the most dangerous threats often come from those within our own circles. And with that, 3 powerful warnings emerge. Jealousy can be as lethal as any weapon, escalating from suspicion to violence with terrifying speed. Ignoring early warning signs, such as controlling behavior or escalating threats, can leave victims vulnerable. And finally, trust must never replace vigilance when personal safety is at risk. Ultimately, Susan Turner's death is not only a story of one woman's jealousy, but also a tragedy that echoes far beyond Ayr. It forces us to confront the devastating consequences when unchecked rage and vulnerability collide. And so, we are left with a haunting question. If jealousy can so quickly turn lethal, how well do we really know the people we let into our lives? Second offender, Elizabeth Sweeney, 36. In a city known for its bustling harbour and granite streets, a crime unfolded in Aberdeen that would shock even seasoned investigators. It was not a story of strangers, but of 2 people fatally bound by addiction, violence, and betrayal. Elizabeth Sweeney, 36 years old, stood before the High Court of Aberdeen in 2025, accused of murder. Her background was already shadowed by crime and hardship. She was a known sex worker in the harbour area, struggling to fund her dependence on crack cocaine and heroin. Court records revealed a long list of prior convictions, including disorder, dishonesty, assault, and carrying weapons. She was, in the words of prosecutors, a woman with a lengthy past criminal record and a dangerous volatility. Her victim was Neil Jolly, aged 49, a father of 3, described by family as a quiet man who sometimes allowed Sweeney to use his flat when she saw clients. Their relationship was complicated. At times they were partners, at other times, ex-partners. What is certain is that in June 2023, that relationship ended in catastrophic violence. In the weeks before the murder, neighbors and acquaintances noticed Jolly with black eyes and bruises. He admitted they came from assaults by Sweeney. The prosecution later argued this was evidence of a pattern of domestic abuse, a cycle of violence escalating toward the inevitable. Between the evening of June 22 and the early hours of the 23rd of June 2023, the final assault took place inside Jolly's flat in Marischal Court. The attack was prolonged and sustained. Sweeney repeatedly struck him with her fists and a household kettle, targeting his head and torso. Forensic experts would later testify that the injuries, over 70 blunt force wounds, were so severe they could be compared to those sustained in a high-speed road accident or a fall from height. The violence left Jolly fatally injured, yet instead of calling for help, Sweeney attempted to conceal what had happened. She washed his body in the shower, covered it with a duvet cover in the bathroom, and tried to scrub bloodstains from the kettle and the carpets. For 3 days, Jolly's body remained hidden in his flat. During that time, Sweeney was seen outside meeting friends, reportedly covered in blood, scoring drugs, and even drinking with another man for nearly 10 hours. Only on the 26th of June 2023 did she contact the police. From a telephone box, she placed a desperate call claiming she had woken to find Jolly raping her, that she had battered him about the head and was unsure if he was alive. Officers forced their way into the flat and found his body, lifeless, in the bathroom. The investigation immediately dismantled her story. The jury heard how she had previously assaulted Jolly, how her actions after the murder, washing, covering, cleaning, were not those of a woman acting in sudden fear, but of someone concealing evidence. The prosecution argued she acted with malice and ill will, not in self-defense. The jury agreed. In February 2025, Sweeney was convicted of murder. On the 31st of March 2025, Lord Andrew Miller handed down her sentence, mandatory life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 18 years before parole eligibility. This was a prolonged and sustained assault, the judge stated. The injuries inflicted were of a severity comparable to catastrophic accidents and aggravated by domestic abuse. Your conduct after the attack magnified the grief of his family. Court reporters noted Sweeney's demeanor as the verdict was read, expressionless, with eyes fixed downward, giving little indication of remorse. To the jury, it was confirmation of the coldness behind her actions. The reaction from Jolly's family was one of devastation. In emotional statements read to the court, his mother, son, and sister described the enormous loss and distress they had suffered, worsened by the knowledge that his body was left unattended for 3 days. Detective Inspector Keith Runcie later told reporters, "This was a brutal act which has destroyed a family. We hope this conviction brings some measure of justice." The case quickly spread online, igniting debates about sentencing fairness in the UK. On forums and social media platforms, users questioned whether the standard 18-year minimum for murder was enough, especially in light of the gruesome details. Others pointed out that male victims of domestic abuse often remain unseen until it is too late. Behind the court proceedings lay the darker psychology of Sweeney herself. Reports spoke of a woman with a difficult personal background, once abused by a partner, spiraling into years of drug addiction. Yet the court was clear: her past could not excuse her choices. Her rage, her need for control, and her refusal to seek help sealed Jolly's fate. The murder of Neil Jolly stands as a tragic reminder of the hidden dangers in toxic and violent relationships. It is a story that challenges assumptions about gender, victimhood, and accountability. And so the question lingers: when violence hides behind closed doors, how many cries for help are missed before it is already too late? Third offender, Donna Brand, 17 years old. In the summer of 1996, a quiet Scottish town was shaken by a crime that would take nearly 3 decades to resolve. It was a story of teenage jealousy, violence, and a long fight for justice. Donna Brand was just 17 years old at the time, a teenager already caught in a cycle of drugs and petty crime. She was in a relationship with Robert O'Brien, who was also secretly seeing one 4-year-old schoolgirl, Caroline Glashan. Brand, pregnant with O'Brien's child, was consumed with jealousy. Friends recalled she had threatened to batter Caroline before, and on the night of the 24th of August 1996, those words became deadly reality. Caroline believed she was meeting O'Brien near the Black Bridge by the River Leven, between Renton and Bonhill. Instead, she walked into a trap. Waiting for her were O'Brien, Brand, and Andrew Kelly. What followed was a brutal assault. Witnesses later recounted that the trio shouted and swore at Caroline, repeatedly punched and kicked her, and struck her with bricks or similar objects. Her body was discovered the following afternoon, the 25th of August 1996. Scotland awoke to headlines about the murdered schoolgirl, sparking media appeals and even a feature on BBC Crime Watch. But despite intense public attention, the case went cold. For years, the killers lived freely, hiding behind alibis and silence. Brand, O'Brien, and Kelly denied involvement, and for decades, there was no justice. Everything changed in 2019 when police reopened the case. Advances in forensic science and renewed witness cooperation began to dismantle the lies that had stood for over 20 years. A neighbor recalled key details, and even a man who had been just 4 years old at the time provided crucial information. Bit by bit, the web of deception unraveled. In December 2023, more than 27 years after Caroline's death, the High Court in Glasgow delivered the long-awaited verdict. All three, Brand, O'Brien, and Kelly, were convicted of murder. The judge, Lord Braid, described it as a brutal, depraved, and above all wicked murder. He told the court that the jury must have accepted that the trio had planned to inflict murderous violence. At sentencing in April 2024, Brand appeared via video link, having been hospitalized with a respiratory infection. Observers noted her subdued expression as the sentence was read: life imprisonment, with a minimum of 17 years before parole. While O'Brien received 22 years and Kelly 18, the court considered Brand's age at the time and her lesser role in the physical attack. But her guilt lay in her presence, her participation in the plan, and her decision to leave Caroline face down in the river, knowing she was still alive. For Caroline's mother, Margaret McKeach, the convictions brought relief but not closure. She had attended court every day for years, determined to face her daughter's killers. Outside court, she said, "This is a day we never thought we would see. Caroline can now rest in peace." It's not closure, it's justice. She condemned O'Brien's claim that his relationship with Caroline had been friends with benefits, calling it absolutely disgusting, and saying she felt physically sick hearing it. The trial gripped Scotland and drew national coverage, with rare courtroom access granted for a BBC documentary titled Murder Trial, Girl in the River. Public reaction was one of shock and anger. Many were appalled at the cruelty inflicted on a 4-year-old girl, and the decades her family had to wait for justice. The successful conviction also reignited debates about cold case investigations in the UK, highlighting how persistence and community cooperation can finally break silence, even after so many years. The psychological portrait of Donna Brand revealed a young woman trapped in jealousy, addiction, and the toxic influence of older partners. Pregnant, entangled in drugs, and desperate for control, she allowed rage to eclipse reason. Her story raises troubling questions. How does teenage insecurity, when combined with substance abuse and violent companions, escalate to murder? And how many tragedies begin with jealousy that is never confronted until it is too late? The murder of Caroline Glashan is not just a crime from the past, it is a reminder of how unchecked envy, peer pressure, and silence can conspire to destroy a life. And while justice may take decades, it eventually arrives. In the end, one haunting truth remains: jealousy left unchecked can kill, and silence can protect killers longer than we ever imagine, but justice, however delayed, has a way of finding its voice. Fourth offender, Dionne Christie, 21 years old. In the summer of 2022, inside a flat in Falkirk, a violent confrontation between two young lovers ended with one dead and the other on trial for her future. It was a case that revealed the fragile line between passion, provocation, and homicide. At the center stood Dionne Christie, just 21 at the time. Once a hairdresser with ambitions of running her own beauty business, she had become better known for her glamorous social media presence, where she posted pouty selfies and pictures from holidays in Tenerife and Paris. To her followers, she looked like any other young woman enjoying life. But behind the curated images lay a darker reality. Christie was a mother of 2 little girls, and 12 weeks pregnant with her boyfriend's child. That boyfriend was 1-year-old Jevin Haig, a known drug dealer who lived a crime-funded lifestyle. Their relationship was volatile. In court, the jury was shown text messages exchanged just a day before the killing. Haig admitted he was losing out on deals. Christie shot back, "You know what is dead? You." Witnesses also heard claims that she had previously stabbed him in the leg and slashed his designer jacket in fits of anger. This storm of jealousy, frustration, and dependence reached its peak on the 26th of June 2022. That night, inside her bedroom, the confrontation turned fatal. Haig carried a 12-inch hunting knife, which he claimed was for protection. During what Christie later described as a struggle, the blade pierced his chest cavity, cutting into his heart. Forensic experts testified that even in an operating theater, the wound might have been unsurvivable. But what raised deeper questions was her reaction in the moments that followed. Instead of calling for help immediately, Christie delayed. Prosecutors told the court she spent several minutes making other calls first, even asking a neighbor to contact her mother, a cardiology cleaner, before finally dialing 999. When she did, she referred to Haig only as her friend and told operators he didn't need an ambulance. Prosecutor Alex Prentice KC argued this delay showed wicked disregard for Haig's life. When police arrived, Christie tried to shift the blame. She told officers that Haig had pulled the knife and was grabbing her, even suggesting he had stabbed himself. But forensic evidence told another story. Her DNA and fingerprints were on the weapon. At trial, her defense painted a picture of a young woman pushed to the edge. They claimed Haig had threatened her unborn child, holding the knife to her stomach as though to cut the baby from her womb. Christie insisted she had thrust backward during the struggle and never intended to stab him. Her lawyer emphasized her remorse and regret, highlighting that she was a first-time offender who had lost both her partner and the child she was carrying. The prosecution, however, argued the killing was fueled by anger. They pointed to the menacing text sent the day before and to her history of violent outbursts. This was no accident, one prosecutor told the jury. It was a young woman lashing out in fury when the money and lifestyle dried up. On the 17th of March 2025, a jury at the High Court in Stirling reached their verdict. They rejected the charge of murder, but also dismissed her claim of self-defense. Instead, they convicted her of culpable homicide, Scotland's equivalent of manslaughter, concluding she acted under provocation. On the 7th of May 2025, Christie appeared via video link from prison to hear her sentence at the High Court in Glasgow. Observers described her as subdued, her once glamorous image replaced by a pale face and lowered gaze. Lady Poole delivered the ruling, 8.5 years in prison. Your actions ended the life of a young man and left his family in deep grief, she said. That grief is lifelong. The reaction outside court was raw. Haig's mother, Karen May Mearns, declared, "A monster has been caged." She described the verdict as something that meant the world to their family. Though nothing could erase the pain of losing her son, public attention on the case was amplified by Christie's behavior while awaiting trial. Her social media activity, holiday selfies, and complaints that the trial had been the hardest years of her life sparked outrage. Many asked how someone facing a homicide charge could present such a carefree image online. This contrast between courtroom remorse and online bravado became a focal point in discussions across forums and news outlets. The psychology of Dionne Christie revealed contradictions. She was young, inexperienced, and under pressure from motherhood and pregnancy. She had no prior record of serious violence, yet her temper and volatile relationship pulled her into tragedy. She lived between two identities, the polished designer persona on social media and the young woman spiraling in private. The killing of Jevin Haig underscores how quickly toxic relationships, jealousy, and violence can ignite into deadly consequences. It is also a reminder of how appearances, whether curated online or presented in court, can obscure dangerous realities. In the end, one truth remains. Behind the most polished smiles, rage and despair can hide, and when they surface, lives are shattered beyond repair. Fifth offender, Avril Jones, 39 years old. In Inverkip, a quiet coastal village in Scotland, a mystery lay hidden behind the walls of a house called Seacroft. For nearly 2 decades, one young woman seemed to vanish without trace, while those entrusted with her care lived off the illusion that she was still alive. The woman at the center of this case was Avril Jones. Born in 1960, by all appearances she was a caregiver, a woman who lived with her partner, Edward Kearney, and had taken in one 9-year-old Margaret Fleming after the death of Margaret's father in 1995. Jones was meant to provide care and stability for a vulnerable teenager with learning difficulties. Instead, she became the architect of one of Scotland's most disturbing cases of betrayal and fraud. The last independent sighting of Margaret was on the 17th of December 1999. Soon afterwards, she disappeared forever. But rather than report her missing, Jones and Kearney began weaving an elaborate deception. They told neighbors and officials that Margaret was alive and well, spinning bizarre stories that she had run away with travelers, was living in England under a false passport, or even working as a gangmaster abroad. None of it was true. Behind these lies was a simple motive: money. From 2000 to 2016, Jones fraudulently claimed more than £182,000 in disability benefits in Margaret's name. She signed forms, answered letters, and played the role of carer, all while the girl in her charge was gone. Prosecutors later argued that Margaret's murder removed what Jones saw as the inconvenience of actually caring for her. For years, no questions were asked. Social services had not seen Margaret in nearly 17 years. It wasn't until changes to the benefits system in 2016 required new documentation that alarm bells rang. When officials demanded proof of Margaret's existence, none could be provided. A missing person investigation was launched, and detectives began to unravel the lies that had stood unchallenged for nearly 2 decades. The investigation quickly revealed contradictions. Detectives described the couple's explanations as farcical. They said Margaret was traveling Europe, then claimed she was working in the illegal drugs trade. Police searches of Seacroft revealed no trace of her. Despite exhaustive efforts, Margaret's body has never been found. In 2019, after one of the longest-running inquiries in Scottish policing, the case went before the High Court in Glasgow. Jones and Kearney denied murder, maintaining that Margaret was alive. But the jury was presented with overwhelming circumstantial evidence that she had been dead for years and that the carer's elaborate stories were a cover for fraud. On conviction, Lord Matthews addressed the courtroom. He described the crime as a gross betrayal of trust, motivated by financial gain. He ordered Jones to serve a life sentence with a minimum of 14 years before parole. Kearney received the same sentence but later died in prison in 2023. Jones was also ordered to repay the £182,000 she had stolen. Observers noted her expression during sentencing: pale, detached, as though the weight of decades of deception had finally crushed the illusion she had maintained. The family of Margaret Fleming were left devastated. Her mother, who had long hoped for answers, was told by police that her daughter's remains were still unaccounted for. Detective Superintendent Paul Livingstone made a public appeal: "Do the decent thing. Let Margaret's family know what happened to her so she can be given a proper funeral." But Jones has never revealed the truth. The case drew national and international attention. It became the subject of a BBC documentary, Murder Trial: The Disappearance of Margaret Fleming, which highlighted not just the crime, but the systemic failures that allowed a vulnerable woman to be forgotten. The public was horrified, not only by the murder itself, but by the fact that for nearly 2 decades, nobody checked on Margaret's welfare. The psychological portrait of Avril Jones is chilling in its ordinariness. Unlike impulsive killers driven by rage, Jones's crime was sustained, calculated, and methodical. For years, she managed to live a normal life while hiding the darkest of secrets. It raises questions about how financial desperation, moral collapse, and unchecked deceit can strip away basic humanity. This case remains one of Scotland's most haunting reminders of betrayal cloaked as care. It exposed the ease with which vulnerable individuals can disappear into silence when systems fail, and when trust is placed in the wrong hands. And in the absence of a body, one truth lingers painfully: justice can convict the guilty, but it cannot bring back the dead, nor heal the grief of families left without answers. Final offender, Nicolle Earley, Kobe, 16 years old. In November 2008, a row over £5 and a borrowed cigarette spiraled into a killing that stunned Scotland. The victim was a grandmother. The killer was just 16. The teenager was Nicolle Earley, later known as one of Scotland's youngest female murderers. Neighbours described her as a troubled girl, rarely seen without a bottle of Buckfast, shaped by abuse and chaos from an early age. By the time she was arrested, she was unemployed, restless, and already known to police for assault. A judge would later tell her, "Violence is part of your makeup." Her victim was Anne Gray, 63 years old, a family friend who lived on the same street as Earley's grandmother. On the 14th of November 2008, a petty dispute brought them face to face. Mrs. Gray had borrowed a cigarette from Earley the day before, promising 2 in return. When the promise wasn't met, Earley went to collect. There was also talk of £5 she claimed was owed for shopping. What began as a neighbourly argument erupted into brutality. Inside Mrs. Gray's home, Earley pushed the older woman to the ground. Then, in a violent outburst, she stamped repeatedly on her head and body. The injuries were catastrophic: a fractured jaw, broken cheekbone, a snapped bone in the neck. The cause of death was a fatal head injury. Forensic evidence later showed that the attack was sustained and merciless, inflicted over a trivial debt. Police officers arriving at the scene found a crime of shocking savagery. Earley admitted her actions but showed little understanding of the devastation she had caused. Detectives later described her as volatile, unpredictable, and prone to explosions of rage. In January 2010, Earley pleaded guilty to murder. At the High Court in Edinburgh, prosecutors presented the disturbing details. When sentence was passed the following month, she stood before Lady Dorian, who told the teenager plainly, "This was a senseless and vicious killing. Violence is part of your makeup." Earley was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 14 years. The sentence had been reduced from 15 because of her guilty plea. Observers noted her demeanour as the punishment was read. Still barely an adult, she stood expressionless, her youth a stark contrast to the enormity of the crime. For many watching, the image of a teenager being given life imprisonment for the murder of a grandmother became a haunting reflection of wasted lives on both sides. Anne Gray's family were devastated. Her daughters publicly condemned the sentence, calling the 14-year minimum a joke and shocking. One relative told reporters, "Our mother's life was worth more than that. We hope she is never freed." But the story of Nicolle Earley did not end there. Since being jailed, she has continued to make headlines. Now 32 and living as a trans man under the name Kobe, Earley has developed what prison officers describe as a notorious record of violence behind bars. He has assaulted fellow inmates, attacked staff, and sent chilling threats to outsiders, once writing blood-smeared letters praising mass murderers and threatening to kill and eat a solicitor. In 2021, a parole hearing was cancelled due to repeated attacks inside prison. The case also entered wider debate, as Earley's identity and prison placement raised questions for the Scottish Prison Service. Officials admitted being in a quandary about how to safely house such a violent offender while balancing gender identity and safety concerns. The controversy added new layers to an already infamous case. Beyond the courtroom and prison walls, the story of Anne Gray's death continues to echo. It is a grim reminder of how violence can erupt from the smallest sparks, and how troubled pasts can breed dangerous futures if left unaddressed. From this tragedy, three powerful lessons emerge. Minor disputes can become lethal when met with unchecked rage, so recognizing escalating aggression is vital. Vulnerable individuals, both young people with chaotic upbringings and the elderly, need stronger safeguards to prevent cycles of abuse from colliding in tragedy. And finally, violent behavior rarely appears overnight. Patterns of aggression must be confronted early before they escalate into irreversible loss. The murder of Anne Gray is not just about one night of violence, it is about the hidden dangers of anger, the failures of support, and the terrible cost when rage becomes lethal. And so, one haunting question remains. If fury can end a life over a cigarette, what other storms lie just beneath the surface in those we think we know? From the cobbled closes of Glasgow to the granite streets of Aberdeen, these cases prove that behind ordinary doors can lie unthinkable violence. But these are just a handful of Scotland's darkest stories. There are more tales of betrayal, obsession, and cruelty that continue to echo across the UK. If you want to uncover what really happened behind the headlines, don't just watch, be part of the journey. Subscribe to UK Real Crime and hit the bell icon so you'll be the first to see our next investigation. Until then, remember, evil often hides in plain sight, and the most chilling stories are the ones closest to home.